The Canadian government goes to war with tech giants over Bill C-18. I'm Marco Perry. Welcome to the Perry Platform. I was going to begin by saying I presume everyone listening to this is already aware of the Bill C-18 fallout, but given what tech giants like Google and Facebook have done, I'm not so sure I can say that. In a move to counter the government's attempt to force them to pay for news, they just said we're not going to show you any Canadian news on Google, Facebook, Instagram, and given the fact that these channels represent the most common ways that Canadians actually find news these days, it's troublesome. We're about to be in the dark for quite some time, at least until this is resolved. Now, for some background, Bill C-18, a government act that was passed, is at the center of this controversy. Many Canadians access news content through digital intermediaries. This is coming from the government's website. They say that Bill C-18 would enact the Online News Act, which proposes a regime to regulate digital platforms that act as intermediaries in Canadian news media. Now, that already is quite disturbing. Where does the government get off thinking they have the right or the ability to regulate these media outlets and platforms? That's a disaster waiting to happen. But the government says that they're doing it in order to enhance fairness in the Canadian digital news market. The bill will introduce a new bargaining framework intended to support news businesses to secure fair compensation when their news content is made available by dominant digital news intermediaries and it generates an economic gain. So, for example, Google is an intermediary for news outlets. Google really isn't the one publishing these articles or doing the reporting. They just have the links to the actual articles. The same can be said for Facebook, Instagram, and really any other social network. They're just a platform that makes it easy for you to get access to the news. The Canadian government is forcing their way in to that relationship, and they're saying that the intermediaries have to pay the news outlets for having the news on their platform. Now, Google came forward and said this just sounds like a tax grab to them, and Meta insisted that the news organizations already benefit tremendously. They get access via this free market of social media to a wide audience, and they get clicks from those very links that lead back to their website, where they can then monetize that via advertising or trying to sell subscriptions. Now, I do side with the tech companies here. I don't think it's the government's role to try and regulate what goes on these platforms, whether that's a search engine or a social media channel. I don't believe it's the government's role either to force these companies to pay news outlets. If the news outlets wanted to create agreements on their own with Facebook and Google, that's up to them. But it seems to me the government has overstepped their boundaries and things are looking bad for everyone. Nobody is benefiting from the current scenario. So what happened? Google and Facebook and other companies said, well, we're not paying for news to be posted on our platform when the news companies already benefit from being on our platform. So Google and Meta are now going to ban all Canadian news content from their respective domains. When you go Googling for a news article and it has a Canadian source like the CBC, for example, it's not going to show up. It's going to be delisted because Google was not on board with the idea of paying for it, so they said we're not going to show it then. Then Meta has followed suit and they're saying the same thing. We're not paying for it, so we're not going to show it. If you are going to be seeking out Canadian content on these channels that everyone uses in Canada, you're going to have no luck. You might see American counterparts like CNN and Fox News if they're reporting on Canadian affairs, but local, domestic, homegrown Canadian news content is now gone because of the foolishness of this bill. So, what did the Canadian government do in response? Well, a logical person may assume that the government rethought their idea. They tried to bring the tech giants into a room to negotiate, but no. Trudeau actually came forward and said that the Canadian government is no longer going to be spending any money on Facebook for advertising. And many people pointed out, while he's talking about the public budget there, the actual Liberal Party and their funds are going to continue to put money into Facebook advertising. That's quite interesting. But he's firing back. And Trudeau had a very strange comment that he put forward. He said that Facebook decided that Canada was a small country, small enough that they could reject our asks. They made the wrong choice by deciding to attack Canada. We want to defend democracy. This is what we're doing across the world, such as supporting Ukraine. This is what we did during the Second World War. This is what we're doing every single day in the United Nations. Wow, that's really quite the comment, and it's dumbfounding. Trudeau is comparing the situation here with the Second World War, with the fight against Nazis. He's comparing that to Facebook and Google saying that we're not going to pay providers who already benefit from getting their content on our platform. Crazy. And he even compares it to things like the Ukraine war and attacks on Canada, attacks on democracy. That's just hyperbole. It's a total overreaction of a quote. Coming from the leader of our country, it's embarrassing. The bill is insane. It's actually quite ridiculous that it passed anyways. And now he's doubling down on it, trying to defend it and trying to paint this as a warfare scenario. Utterly ridiculous. I'm not sure the Canadian government understands what's going on here. So they've decided to pull advertising dollars from Facebook. How much is it? $10 million? Is Facebook going to care? Is Facebook going to say, oh, you got us. You have us by the pinky here. Yes, let us fork over however many millions you're asking of us from this bill, just so you restart your advertising spending. The answer is no. Facebook and Google are likely going to continue not to post any Canadian news content on their websites. And what's the government going to do after that? Are they going to continue to escalate? Do they want Google and Meta to pull out of the Canadian job market? Do they want to have worse relationships with these companies? I don't understand the end game here. First of all, passing this bill was a mistake. The government should have never gotten involved in this matter, and it's actually a trend we've seen with the Trudeau Liberal Party. They continue to push things where they're trying to exert more and more control. They want more government regulation. They want government censorship. They want to be in control. They want to call the shots, and they want to impose their will on things like the free market and on the individual's rights to express themselves and whatnot. We've seen that time and time again. This is just the latest example of such actions. The idiocy of this bill becomes even more clear when we analyze the various stakeholders. Take the government, first of all. Are they benefiting from the current situation? No, they're not. They have a disaster on their hands where their Canadian population may no longer have access to Canadian news anymore on their desired methods of communication. Take the news networks. Are they benefiting? No. Do you know how much web traffic they're going to lose now that they don't have access to Google and Facebook and Instagram? That's a disaster for them. They're going to lose money now. Because what Facebook said was true. They did benefit from being listed on Google as a search engine, and they benefited from the exposure they got through things like Facebook, via posting from their own accounts, like the CBC accounts and whatnot, and from other users circulating that content. There's going to be a massive drop in their web traffic, which is going to hit their bottom line because they depend on advertising, which depends on that web traffic. They're in a disaster state right now. Now take the average Canadian. What kind of state are they in? They're in a state of confusion. They're about to lose access to news. Everyone uses Google to find content. Everyone uses Facebook to find content. Everyone uses Twitter to find content. Very few people actually have something like the CBC bookmarked on their browser where they can just access it directly, or they're getting the paper or something like that. This move helps nobody. How could our politicians think it was a good idea to ram it through? How could they have thought for a second that the tech giants would take it without questioning it? How could they for a second think that the public actually wanted this? Nobody wanted this. Maybe the individual media companies did, but that's not who the government is supposed to represent. Things are much worse for everyone right now. Then we have the ringleader of this mess, Trudeau, chirping about how World War II and Ukraine and UN and drawing connections where there are no connections to be drawn. This is not warfare, it's simply the result of a dumb policy being enacted, something this government is very familiar with. The government is not going to bend Meta or Google's hand by threatening to take away their minuscule advertising spend. There really are only two paths forward here. The government can continue to escalate, and the next threat is a dystopian one. They can threaten to ban Google and Facebook from Canada if they don't get in line and obey this law. We see that happen in countries like India. countries where democracy really is fragile. And that would be quite ironic given Trudeau's silly speech here, talking about the principles of democracy and freedom and choice. That's a path we have to avoid. Now, the only other thing they can do is sit back at the table and renegotiate with these companies. And further, I think it's even a better idea to renegotiate down to the point where this bill is being completely stripped or overturned. There's no need for such a thing. It's causing massive issues for no valid reason. Get rid of it. And further, these politicians need to think through what they're proposing. It seems like they're trapped in their ivory tower, and they're so disconnected with reality that they can't predict outcomes that the average Canadian could see a mile away. Now, as always, I'll keep you up to date on the latest on the situation. And with that, it does bring us to the end of our conversation for today. If you enjoyed the material, be sure to leave a review and share. That'll help us grow. And you can find me online at perryplatform.org and on social media at perryplatform. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you soon.